The world woke up to a shock from Beijing. While much of the globe was winding down after China's Golden Week festivities, the Chinese government returned to work with a move so severe, so sweeping, that analysts are calling it a massive escalation in the US-China economic confrontation. Overnight, Beijing didn't just adjust trade policy, it potentially redrew the boundaries of the global technology map. With a few strokes of a bureaucratic pen, China may have gained de facto control over parts of the semiconductor, clean energy, and even defense industries. The ripple effect could reach from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, from the factories of South Korea to the laboratories of Germany. This is not just another headline about tariffs or sanctions, this is a turning point, one that could determine who controls the building blocks of the future. China's 8-day Golden Week holiday had just ended when the Ministry of Commerce and the General Administration of Customs released a bombshell announcement. In one of the most sweeping trade measures since the start of the US-China technology war, Beijing unveiled a massive expansion of export controls across several critical high-tech sectors: rare earths, advanced materials, and clean energy technologies. The move, codified through 6 separate official notices, is set to take effect on November 8th. And it represents far more than a bureaucratic reshuffle. It's a strategic strike aimed at the very foundation of the global supply chain. From now on, any company wishing to export a range of materials, from super hard industrial components to rare earth elements like holmium and lithium to synthetic graphite used in batteries, will require special government approval from Beijing. 2 of these notices, numbers 59 and 60, remain unpublished, leaving analysts worldwide speculating about what additional restrictions might be hiding behind closed doors. The secrecy surrounding these measures only deepens the sense that China is preparing for a long and intense economic confrontation. In Washington, the shock was palpable. According to reports by Reuters, the White House was blindsided by the announcement. Officials in the US describe the move as nothing short of a massive escalation, a phrase now echoing through policy circles from Washington to Brussels. The decision could reshape global supply chains virtually overnight. One particular notice, announcement number 61, is drawing intense attention. It could effectively give Beijing de facto control over key segments of the global semiconductor supply chain. The implications are staggering. As the New York Times highlighted, China refines roughly 99% of the world's supply of dysprosium, an ultra-rare element vital to the production of heat-resistant components for semiconductors and advanced defense systems. One refinery near Shanghai, run by Shunga Resources, a company majority owned by China's Ministry of Land Resources, produces the entire global supply of this ultra-pure material. Experts are warning that if these restrictions are strictly enforced, the results could be unprecedented. Jimmy Goodrich, of the University of California's Institute for Global Conflict and Cooperation, stated bluntly, "If enforced and the US doesn't respond strongly, Beijing could have complete control over the entire advanced semiconductor supply chain." He went even further. Even US-made AI chips, built in American factories and sent to US-based AI labs, could require Beijing's permission. That statement alone underscores the extraordinary reach of China's new rules. This isn't just about limiting exports, it's about creating leverage, making the world realize how dependent it has become on Chinese processing and refining power. Under the new measures, the scope of Chinese control could extend far beyond its borders. The Wall Street Journal reports that any product containing Chinese rare earth materials, making up even 0.1% of its value, will require Chinese government approval before export, no matter where that product was manufactured. That means a smartphone assembled in South Korea, a solar panel built in Germany, or even a jet engine developed in the United States could all fall under Beijing's watchful eye if they rely on Chinese-sourced materials or intermediate technologies. This extraterritorial reach could effectively place large portions of the global clean energy and semiconductor industries under Chinese regulatory authority. But such an aggressive move is not without risk. Former U.S. State Department official Chris McGarr warned that the United States retains formidable countermeasures. The U.S. has the ability to counterpunch hard, he said. If Washington were to require licenses for any chip made with U.S. technology to be exported to China, the entire Chinese tech industry could be paralyzed overnight. This high-stakes standoff is no longer about tariffs or trade deficits. It's about technological sovereignty. Both nations are now weaponizing the materials and minerals that fuel modern innovation. The rare earths in smartphones, the lithium in batteries, the graphite in solar panels, and the microchips in artificial intelligence systems. The roots of this confrontation go back years. Even before the current escalation, the United States had begun laying the groundwork to reduce its dependence on Chinese raw materials. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, around 70% of America's rare earth imports still come from China. Recognizing the danger, Washington moved to secure domestic and alternative sources. Under the current administration, emergency powers were invoked earlier this year to fast-track financing and permits for rare earth mining and processing facilities. The U.S. government poured $400 million into the Mountain Pass mine in California, the country's only operational rare earth site, making the Department of Defense its largest shareholder. At the same time, Washington began exploring international partnerships to diversify supply. Projects in Greenland and Ukraine have been discussed as potential alternatives, though both remain years away from full operation. In short, while the U.S. is making progress towards self-sufficiency, it remains highly vulnerable in the short term. China's announcement struck at precisely this weak point, testing America's readiness for a prolonged economic confrontation. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop described the move as both strategic and symbolic. The U.S. appears blindsided, he said. This is a massive escalation and a direct response to the U.S.'s recent restrictions on Chinese companies. Beijing has escalation dominance in rare earths and clean energy technologies, but the U.S. also has real leverage. It just hasn't used it yet. His warning was clear. If Washington decides to exercise that leverage, the escalation cycle could accelerate rapidly, inflicting economic pain on both sides. What makes this confrontation so dangerous is its scope. This is not simply an argument over tariffs or trade balances. It's a battle over who controls the essential ingredients of 21st century technology, the semiconductors that drive artificial intelligence, the rare metals that power electric vehicles, and the clean energy components that will shape the future economy. By weaponizing these materials, China has moved the conflict into uncharted territory, a realm where sanctions and supply restrictions could determine not just who wins in trade, but who leads the next technological revolution. This marks a new phase of economic warfare, one that could spiral far beyond boardrooms and trade ministries. It could alter the trajectory of entire industries, disrupt global innovation, and test the resilience of economic alliances worldwide. And while all this unfolds on the geopolitical stage, something equally revealing has been happening inside China's own borders. The timing is no coincidence. As Beijing flexed its muscles abroad, it faced a sobering reality at home. The so-called Golden Week holiday, one of the longest and most celebrated periods in the Chinese calendar, has just concluded, and the numbers paint a troubling picture of China's domestic economy. On the surface, the data looked promising. Travel numbers broke records, with 888 million domestic tourism trips made between October 1st and 8th, a symbolic and lucky figure, but one that analysts suspect was rounded for effect. Tourism revenue climbed to 809.1 billion yuan, roughly 113.6 billion USD, a 15% increase from last year. But the headline figures conceal a deeper problem. Chinese consumers are moving, but they're not spending. Average spending per trip dropped to just 113.9 yuan, around $15 per day, the lowest level in 3 years and well below pre-pandemic levels. Despite packed trains, crowded airports, and overflowing scenic spots, consumer confidence remains fragile. Local media outlets describe the holiday as a paradox, a nation bustling with activity, yet reluctant to open its wallet. In tourist hubs like Zhejiang, visitor numbers surged by over 7%, yet ticket revenues rose only 3.5%, implying a notable decline in spending per visitor. In Hubei, the pattern was even more dramatic. Tourist numbers more than doubled, but revenues increased by just 47%, marking a 27% drop in average spending. The Ministry of Commerce confirmed that retail and restaurant sales during the first 4 days of the holiday rose a mere 3.3% year on year, a slowdown from the 6.3% growth recorded during the May Day holiday earlier this year. Even local governments' efforts to spur consumption, with nearly 480 million yuan in travel and cultural vouchers, failed to offset the caution that has gripped Chinese households. Perhaps the most symbolic indicator came from the entertainment sector. Despite 11 new film releases during the holiday period compared to 8 the year before, the box office brought in only 1.84 billion yuan, about $254 million USD, down 13% from last year. Average ticket prices also fell to 36.6 yuan, making this the second weakest National Day box office performance since 2019. Chinese social media dubbed it Golden Week, a play on words reflecting both the high mobility and the low enthusiasm to spend. Economists from Citigroup summarized it bluntly. Holiday activities are back to normal, but largely lukewarm. There is limited evidence of new growth momentum, and the wealth effect from the stock rally remains muted. Indeed, hopes that a modest recovery in Chinese equities would boost consumer sentiment have not materialized. Most Chinese households store their wealth not in stocks, but in property, and that sector remains mired in a prolonged crisis now entering its 5th year. The disappointing Golden Week results highlight the challenges Beijing faces in trying to transition to a consumption-driven growth model. Despite ambitious stimulus measures and frequent policy adjustments, domestic demand remains weak. The paradox is striking. Mobility has returned to normal. Tourist sites are full. Highways are jammed. Yet behind the facade of normalcy, consumers remain deeply cautious. The underlying concerns, stagnant wages, youth unemployment, and the property market downturn are dampening confidence and constraining spending. Reuters summed it up starkly. Chinese holidaymakers' average spending dipped to a 3-year low, dashing hopes that the recent stock market rally would encourage consumers to open their wallets. For policymakers in Beijing, this trend is alarming. Without stronger wage growth or a sustained rebound in household sentiment, China risks being trapped in a cycle of high activity but low spending, a phenomenon that could severely limit the country's long-term growth prospects. So, what does all this mean? On the one hand, China is asserting dominance abroad, tightening its grip on the raw materials that power the world's most advanced technologies. On the other, it faces deep-seated weakness at home as its citizens hesitate to spend, invest, or take risks. This dual reality of outward aggression and inward fragility defines China's position today. The export controls signal power and confidence, but the disappointing Golden Week reveals anxiety and caution. It's a reminder that economic warfare and domestic stability are two sides of the same coin. A nation can wield enormous influence abroad, but if its own citizens lack the confidence to spend, the foundation beneath that power begins to crack. The coming months will test both China's resolve and the world's resilience. Will Beijing's gamble on export control solidify its dominance or accelerate global efforts to decouple? And can China rekindle its own domestic confidence before economic stagnation takes hold? The answers to those questions may define not just China's future, but the future of the entire global economy.